In local matters, the race is on for the governor's mansion in New York. That's where Democratic incumbent Andrew Cuomo is running for his third term. He is backed by party leaders like Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton.
Cuomo is facing a primary challenge from actress Cynthia Nixon. She's best known for her role as Miranda Hobbs in the hit HBO series Sex and the City. Here to break down the race now is Laura Nahmias. She's a New York Playbook writer for Politico. Thanks for joining us, Laura.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so the Democratic National Chairman, Tom Perez, says, listen, the National Party should not get involved in the primary. There shouldn't be endorsements. They shouldn't be playing favorites. But then he comes out in favor of Cuomo and not Nixon.
Right.
What gives?
He's breaking his own rule. This has really angered a lot of the liberal wing of the Democratic Party. Tom Perez, if you remember, was the establishment candidate to lead the DNC after the 2016 election. And a lot of people on the party's left, former Bernie Sanders supporters, see what he's doing as throwing his support behind another establishment candidate,
right,
and essentially blocking out a potential left-wing insurgent from having a chance at holding the future of the party.
So Cuomo won 95% of the delegates in the vote of last week. And explain to our viewers what that might potentially mean for Cynthia Nixon.
So that's not so much of a surprise. Governor Cuomo is the head of the state Democratic Party. The convention was highly scripted. Cynthia Nixon really didn't have much of a chance of winning a majority of the delegate votes at the convention, or even a much bigger percentage than that. But what it means for her is that she's going to have to go the petitioning route in order to get on the Democratic ballot for the primary in September. She just has to gather tens of thousands of petition signatures. It's a little bit of a harder route, but it's still doable.
It's doable for her?
Yes.
You do?
Yes.
Is she raising a lot of money?
Well, we haven't seen her first filing yet, but she has said that she's raising a lot of small dollar donations from people, and it'll be a couple of weeks before we get to see what exactly that means. Also, she has a huge personal fortune from her acting.
Right.
We don't know whether or not she's going to put any of her own money into the race.
So let's talk about their platforms. How do they differ?
Well, they don't differ a lot, actually, in part because Governor Cuomo has sort of adopted a lot of her positions since she's entered the race on things like legalizing recreational marijuana, coming out in favor of more tenant protections. Where they really differ is that Cynthia Nixon says that Cuomo makes these kinds of promises and then doesn't follow through with them. He's said that he cares about strengthening rent controls here in New York City and granting passing a DREAM Act in New York State. But he said that for years, and it hasn't happened under his leadership. So really, where they're separate is that she says she's going to actually follow through on some of those things, and she's trying to call his bluff.
Beyond New York State, does Governor Cuomo harbor national ambition?
He's widely rumored to harbor national ambition. His father famously dithered on the tarmac, deciding whether or not to run in 1992. He's hasn't made any specific moves, and he's very cagey and coy about whether or not he actually wants to do it. But he thinks, according to people around him, that he has the kind of profile that's necessary to actually win in a general election nationally. He might have a little bit of a harder time in a primary where the most left candidate is likely to win, but people around him think that he thinks he's got what it takes.
So we've been talking about the Democrats. Is there anybody on the Republican side that's worth watching?
Well, the Republicans have put forward a candidate, the Dutchess County Executive Mark Molinaro. He's really well liked by people in the Republican Party in the state. He's seen as maybe a coalition builder, a little bit of an outsider. He hasn't been in state government that much, or not as much as other candidates who could have won the nomination. But he really has an uphill road if he's going to win the race. The only hope for him is if Cynthia Nixon stays on the ballot in the November election on a third-party line, perhaps, and the vote splits, and he's able to capture the election that way.
Right. That seems like a long shot.
Yeah, it sort of does. Laura, before we let you go, I mean, you're newsletter from Politico about New York politics is so interesting. A lot of people are big fans of that. And I want to get your take on Eric Schneiderman, former New York Attorney General who resigned under these allegations, and who is looking to fill that seat. And what kind of a bombshell was that, do you think, in New York political circles?
It was a huge bombshell. He was someone who was never seen. He was a very mild-mannered person. I covered him personally for years. I was shocked.
You were shocked yourself.
His personality is not aggressive. I never saw him drink. He had a reputation as a yogi. He would go out of state to do yoga all the time. It was totally stunning. But he resigned almost immediately, and that paved the way for the work of replacing him to begin. And it ironically gave the state its first acting female attorney general, which is something that's
remarkable. That in New York State, that it's the first time we've had an acting female attorney general. I was shocked when I heard that.
Right. There's not a lot of women in higher statewide elected office in New York. Almost none, in fact. Well, there's none right now, until Schneiderman resigned. But it could also end up giving the state its first female woman of color in statewide office, and that's because the Democrats nominated New York City public advocate Letitia James as their candidate to run on the ballot in September and in November. And if she wins, she would be the first female person of color to hold statewide office in New York, which is really remarkable when you think about it.
Given New York, it really is.
Given the state's reputation as a sort of beacon of progressivism and progressive values, and this might be the first time.
Laura Nahmias, thank you very much.